Brad Fox, thanks very much for joining us.
A pleasure, Helen.
What do you think of the changes to FoFA that the government has brought in with the support of the Palmer United senators? Because there's been a huge amount of disagreement, even in your own sector, about these changes and whether they properly protect consumers.
Yeah, this has been a very long debate, more than 4 years, working out the best way to improve the landscape for financial advice. And where we've got to is to wind back some of the regulation overreach. A very important part in here is that financial advice, it does need to protect consumers. There's no question about that. But we also need to make sure people can afford to get it. So if we make it too difficult, then we actually don't get a net win. What the FoFA amendments have done is bring things back to a pragmatic position that people will be protected by the world's best interest duty and the most stringent guidelines and rules, regulations and laws that apply to financial advisors anywhere.
So will the changes Clive Palmer's senators brought in, will they do anything? Because they don't seem to be much different to what the government wanted anyway, and many people still say that weakens protections for consumers.
What the Palmer United Party put forward to the coalition are steps that have made sure that the changes to the law will be conveyed very clearly to the consumer that sits with a financial advisor. So it's taken them, if you like, off the background rule book that applies to an advisor, and it now says right there in front of the client, I have a best interest duty to meet under the law. This is what that best interest duty looks like, and I am telling you, I'm putting it in writing to you, that I have met that test in this advice to you. You can proceed with confidence, and we'll both sign it.
Isn't that just a ticking of the boxes routine? They don't have to actually prove that this advice has been in the absolute best interest of the client?
Oh, it's nothing like ticking a few boxes at all. You're talking here about the best interest test, and there were 7 steps in it. There's now 6. Those 6 steps are extremely comprehensive, and those that have criticised the best interest test, no one has given an example of an activity that is not covered by the first 6. So it is as strenuous as can be, and the way it's been improved now makes sure there's certainty for not only the client but also the advisor in meeting the duty. It's not just tick a box. You know, the advisor is saying to the client, and Clive Palmer has made sure that they have to put it in writing and put it right there in front of the client and have it acknowledged and signed. Now, there isn't any professional in Australia that has a higher test upon them than to put it right there in front and sign to it that I've done my job right.
How does the client know they have done the job right? How does the client know they've done the advice in the best interests of that client?
Well, the law requires it as the first step. You know, there's a lot of comparisons drawn between whether the professionalism in financial advice, for example, equates to the medical profession. Now, a doctor acts in your best interests. A financial advisor acts in your best interests. If they fail that duty, there are remedies available, and that's whether it's in the medical field or whether it's financial advice field. You can't stop someone that wants to deliberately break the law in any field of endeavour. We do have the toughest laws now, and people will be signing off in front of the client they've met them. There are strong remedies where that fails. But, you know, when we look at failure, the percentage, the number of people that have been failed by advice is very small compared to the number of people that have greatly benefited from advice. Now, that's not to say there shouldn't be empathy and understanding for those that have received poor advice, and they should pursue the remedies available to them. But most people, the vast majority of people, nearly all people that get advice, have had great benefit from it.
Is it the case, though, Brad Fox, that with, 3/4 of financial planners attached to the big 4 banks and AMP, they will be incentivised to push those companies' products?
This has been a great source of misinformation throughout the debate. Where there's been talk about financial advisors being remunerated for selling a product linked to where they're licensed, that has been about general advice and not personal advice. So personal advice is when an advisor sits and asks you questions about you and proposes solutions about you. General advice is where you might, over the counter or over the phone, purchase a product without receiving advice that that product is a good fit for you. So there's quite a difference here. Financial advisors that give personal advice will not get commissions in any way, can't be remunerated on volume of sales in any way under what's being put forward now. This has been a real source of misinformation.
So for advisors who give personal advice, they will only get a fee from the client, they get nothing from the product distributors, they get no trailing commissions, no incentives?
Correct. That's right. There is nothing built into products anymore. That's been completely outlawed for investment and superannuation, that there can be any built-in payment to the advisor. Any payment that does go to the advisor, the client will have that given to them in writing and the client signs off to authorise that payment to be made. It's not a dialed in one big bundled number. That stuff is gone, long gone.
What about advisors and bank tellers who will now be able to give general advice? Will they be incentivised or given some sort of remuneration from the banks and AMP who dominate this financial advice sector?
The big debate through all of this has been, how can someone who is an employee be rewarded for doing their job well? And the distinction that's being drawn is to significantly dilute the connection between selling a quantity of product and doing your job well. So the term that's been put around this is balanced scorecard.
Brad Fox, excuse me, what is wrong with just getting your salary for doing your job well? Why must they be further incentivised?
Yeah, this could be a lengthy debate. The issue around how people are remunerated, most research says that where bonus structures are built well, behaviours improve. Now, I'm not saying that that can be honoured in every situation, but there is nothing wrong with incentives.
Yes, behaviours for the product seller.
Yeah, but they also have a role to play. So if you walked into a bank branch and you said, I want a deposit account to put my salary check into, what do you have? You would expect an answer, wouldn't you, Helen? And if someone walked into a bank and said, I would like to open a superannuation account, what do you have? They would expect an answer. Now, this is what people should make sure they understand. If you were making a decision about an asset the size that superannuation accounts traditionally become, which is usually the largest or second largest asset someone will ever have, I wouldn't buy my advice over the counter, even as general advice. I would want to sit down and get personal advice. So this is the part people need to understand. If they walk in and do it over the counter, they will only get the house product. It may not be right for them. They should get personal advice and make sure it's right for themselves.
All right, well, just to be clear on this, if it's a house product given to a client by the bank teller, that bank teller could be remunerated for that and the client would never know. They don't have to disclose that remuneration?
The client discloses certain things as general advice.
No, the bank teller.
Let me finish. The maximum that someone will be remunerated towards their performance in providing product advice that gets taken up by clients is to be about 5%. Now, that is not a significant amount of money that would let me or anybody else that worked for a bank, you wouldn't think that would let you distort your behaviour. It is not saying 50% of your salary can be provided as a bonus for pushing the house product.
Turning to the David Murray interim report, it was very strong on the poor advice given by financial advisors. It said people feel they are poorly served by financial advice, and also the lack of training for financial advisors. Do you agree with David Murray on those issues?
There's some interesting issues raised here. The first is that, yes, some people have been let down by advice, no question, and they have our complete empathy. The other aspect, though, is that when we look at the entry level for financial advice, it has been recognised broadly across the industry that it's too low for where the complexity of financial advice has got to, and we will see those standards rise in the very near future. There's more than one inquiry going on about how best to do that, and in fact there's considerable amount of industry work going on about how to do that best as well. So those things are going to change. But that doesn't mean that everybody advising today isn't capable of doing their job. In fact, most are. The research from people that get advice is that they value it highly. It's a perception issue from those not getting advice. And if we look at the 1,000 people a week that are retiring right now, the baby boomers that are stepping out of earning into their twilight spending phase of their superannuation money, not enough of them are maximising what they'll get in retirement because they're scared to seek advice. Now, we all need to work on that, but people should take the opportunity to get advice, but choose carefully.